Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. Again, this show happens because some of you guys and girls are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/SIFTD. A special thanks to you guys who are doing that. That's why this show happens. You're probably wondering why there's all this stuff behind me today. Well, that's because one of our closets has a water leak and we had to remove everything out of the closet while we wait for it to be repaired. So our place right now is just torn asunder. So forgive me for the piles of clothes that are on the bed behind me. Unfortunately, we're going through some things here and we're waiting for our landlord to get into gear and come fix it. One note before we get going, we do need more questions. Like, it feels like since we stopped doing this every week, we aren't getting the weekly input of questions from you guys. We barely had enough to do today's episode. So please, if you can, head on over to the website. In the header there's a link to go to our forums where you can ask questions. We're not getting a lot of questions from new folks anymore. It tends to be like the same group of people who are always asking questions. Don't be shy. You can ask me about anything. And I'm not going to attack you. If you've watched the show, you know I handle the show with kid gloves. So anyway, thanks for your pledges at $7 or more per month. And let's get to this week's questions. All right, our first question this week actually does come from someone new who doesn't ask a lot of questions for Ask Shane Anything, and that is Ben. Thanks, Ben. I work as a teacher, and I've noticed recently that a lot of my colleagues and students are gaming, but almost all seem to be playing either Fortnite, EA Sports FC, or Call of Duty. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. One of these colleagues asked me what sort of thing I've been playing. I said Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. He'd never heard of it. Similarly, my students in 7th grade look at me quizzically when I say that I don't generally play multiplayer games. Obviously, this data is anecdotal, but I wonder how accurate a picture it paints of the industry moving forward. Do you think there will always be space for single-player, story-driven games? Okay, Ben, thanks again for asking a question, and I hope you won't be shy about asking questions in the future. In fact, go right over there right now and ask another one. That would be great. I guess the first thing I would say is that things have changed. Now, I don't know how old you are, but you're a teacher, so you're an adult. You're adulting. But things have changed since I was a kid. When I was a kid, well, generally I would get off school and I'd go to like practice or whatever, football practice, basketball practice, baseball practice, or whatever. But even when I was off sports and I wasn't in a sport at a particular time, after school, as soon as we walked in the door, did our homework, we were back out playing, having fun, skating, or whatever it is that you like to do. That's the way it used to be. You get off school, you do your homework, and then you go hang out in person with all your friends, and you do fun stuff until it got dark and your parents were like, you need to come home and eat. It was a whole different way of living. And here's what I think, and obviously this is just my opinion, but I think that basically what has happened is younger people have replaced that playtime where we go out in the neighborhood and shoot hoops or play street hockey or get into trouble or whatever. They've replaced that time with playing games online. So instead of getting together in person, now they're just getting together and they're playing Fortnite, or they're playing EA Sports FC, or they're playing Call of Duty. And let's be honest, like, if most kids have decent parents, and I feel like most do, I like to err on the side of that, they're not going to be allowed to play games all that much. Maybe on the weekends they get some more time, but every night they're probably going to get an hour or something. And if you have an hour, are you going to dive into some crazy involved single-player game? Or are you going to jump on Fortnite and play with your friends and chat? Because the other thing is that we've talked about on this show before is that the virtual world and the real world for that generation are starting to blur. So we talked about how people get bullied if their Fortnite avatar has crappy cosmetics or free cosmetics. People go to school, they're made fun of as if they were wearing like worn out shoes or worn out clothes to school. What's happening online in Fortnite carries over into their real lives. And so I think it's more of a social thing than anything that they get together and they play these games and they get to show off their new emotes that they paid for or their new cosmetics that they got that everybody knows that they cost $20 or whatever. It's kind of funny how that whole kind of caste system has carried over into virtual games. Not a good part of video gaming, I would add. So I think that's what's happening there as far as the kids are concerned. Now, the other teachers that are also your age, my guess is they also have kids, and so they're also running into the problem of, hey, I could get involved in this crazy single-player game. And I'll just say, right off the top, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the worst game for stopping and not playing for a couple weeks and then coming back and trying to get back into it. Now, obviously, it has a pretty detailed waypoint system. It can show you where you need to go next, but as far as figuring out like the context of what you're doing and the story, it can be difficult to follow. And in fact, there are a couple places in that game where you got to fight bosses and you need very specific spells. And if you don't take them with you, you have to fight through like these really long areas again to go back and like change the loadout. That is what actually made me stall on the game. I got to a boss fight where I needed a very specific set of spells to beat the boss. And there was a huge, for whatever reason, in that boss fight, there was a big chunk of gameplay that you needed to play through before it would let you fight the boss. And if you quit and went back, you had to fight through that whole section again. And I got sick of it. And so that's where I stopped playing the game myself. So single player games, they can be intimidating for people, or they're just like, you know what? I don't want to have to worry about like figuring out what I need to do and where I need to go and what's happened in the story, because unfortunately they don't make recap videos if you've already played a game for 20 or 30 hours. They just don't do that. So I think that's where the adults are coming from. I think they're probably just busy. They're teachers. And as we all know, teachers, one, don't make anywhere near as much money as they should be making, and two, when they go home from work, they still have work to do. You still have to grade papers and do this all this other stuff. One of my stepmothers was a teacher, and I just remember that she'd get home from work, and then she'd work for another 3 or 4 hours, and then she'd eat dinner, and she'd go to sleep, and then she'd get up and do it all over again. So my guess is you're kind of in that space right now, and your colleagues are kind of in that space. Not a lot of free time, which again, it makes it more palatable to pick up a multiplayer game and play a couple rounds of Team Deathmatch or whatever. So I think part of it is that the kids are changing. The other part of it is that it's impractical for adults to play a lot of single-player games. Adults that have kids anyway. And so to answer your question, though, are single-player games, story-driven games going away? No, not now. Because what we found is that there are like 20 or 30 million people that are just like us. People who are really in tune with the games industry, who are interested in picking up the best games every month. The problem is that we're not being replaced, and I talked about this in an editorial before, that we're not being replaced by people like us. And so you're starting to see the market flat, and you're starting to see it not growing. So I think that's a little bit of a concern. I think maybe someday there will be less single-player games, and actually there are less right now, especially if you compare it back to like the PS2 era. It's not even close. So I think, yeah, you're going to generally see a slow dwindling of single-player games. The other thing, too, is that our standards are really high now. Like the 30 or 40 million people who are like us, like, we don't take crap. Like, your game has to be really good to crack into our lexicon. And so, again, I think that's why you're seeing less and less single-player games, because it's a hard nut to crack. It's hard to make money on them, even if you dump a ton of money into them, as you saw with Suicide Squad, because the other angle of us is that we're very persnickety, and if something offends our IP that we like, we get really pissy, and in a lot of cases, we act like juveniles. So there's a lot of stuff tying into why we're getting more multiplayer, why we're getting less single player. Will they go away eventually? No, they'll never go completely away, but we're already seeing less games of that type, and I think that trend is going to continue. Okay, next up, we have a question from El Timbo. Hey Shane, I'm just curious, do you upvote or downvote comments on SIFTD? As the owner of SIFTD, part of me thinks you don't participate in that way, as it may be a conflict of interest, but on the other hand, it's an anonymous way for you to participate in the conversation without expressly doing so. That's a great question, El Timbo, and I can be perfectly honest with you. I think about stuff like this all the time, and I will say this. It makes me happy that when you thought about me in the context of this question, you said to yourself, Shane's going to do what's right. That makes me very happy. If you're giving me the benefit of the doubt, I'm assuming based upon what I've done in my career over the last 20-some years, and that makes me feel good that people are recognizing that. But I will say this. Yes, I do upvote and downvote stuff. Now, I don't do it to put my finger on the scale, so to speak. I use upvotes to thank people for the most part on the site. So if I ask people for feedback on something, or if I leave a comment and someone's very thoughtful in their response to me, I absolutely upvote that stuff. I literally never downvote people, like ever. I think I've maybe had like 5 downvotes ever on the site. Like, I just don't do it. So that I don't do, but I do upvote people. Like, if people, also every once in a while, one of you guys will just leave a comment that just like blows me away. Like, it just shows how insightful you guys are and how smart you guys are. I'll upvote those too, because I want to see more of that on the site. I want to encourage positive behavior on the site. That's what I use the upvotes for, and I never use the downvotes really ever. The other thing I would say too, generally, about how I operate on the internet is that I don't share my opinion very often. You can see my Twitter feed is pretty much abandoned at this point. Even back when it was active, I was never sharing my opinion about video games on my Twitter feed, and I don't really do it anywhere other than here. Because you guys are paying for my opinion. If I'm out there just giving it away to everybody, then it loses value and it's not worth paying for anymore. So you won't see me commenting on stuff. Like even back in the day when my Twitter feed was active, I would talk about like sports and music and stuff like that. I hardly ever shared my takes on video games on my Twitter feed. And that's because, again, you guys are paying for it and you deserve that. So there's a bunch of different ways that I interact with social media and the internet and SIFTD in general, and most of it is driven by you. So that's pretty much how I interact with it. The other thing I should mention too is if you care about these sorts of things, if you want to level up more quickly on SIFTD and get more achievements and things like that, upvoting people adds into that total that will help you build your level and unlock more achievements on SIFTD. So, yeah, I try to, it's a good point. Like, it is a bit of a conflict of interest for me to, like, downvote people, but that's not why I do it. Like, I appreciate any comments on my website. Obviously, unless they're hateful or, you know, they're threatening people or things like that, or they break our terms of service. But I like anyone interacting on the site. That's why I built the site. I want to see intelligent discussion between adults about our favorite hobby, something that we're all very passionate about. So I don't downvote people. I do upvote, but not that often. But when I do, it's because they did something really awesome. All right, our next question comes from Khalib 12i. Who won, Kendrick or Drake? I just gotta say, I don't care. I really don't care at all. I don't even know if the beef is over. It's so funny how social media tries to make controversy happen. It's like I logged in the one day and like all my notifications were all for that rap beef. And I'm just like, I have never tweeted or liked or retweeted anything to do with either one of those guys or ever did anything like that for anything hip-hop related ever. It was just like the algorithm saying you must interact with this because everybody else is. Sorry. Like, to me, stuff like Rappy, it's so petty. It's ridiculous. Like, to see people getting so wrapped up in it. Like, I saw people who were writing like 1,000-word diatribe. Like, go out and touch grass. Like, you should not be that obsessed with somebody else. Spend that time on yourself and making yourself better. Go do something to make your life better or someone else's life better. What are you doing? This vapid part of our society drives me bonkers. But going back to rap battles, or so to speak, like, diss tracks, it's the most cowardly way to handle a beef. Back in the 80s, when I liked hip-hop, because hip-hop was mostly positive and talked about things that to make a lot of people's lives better instead of shooting each other. I loved hip-hop in the 80s. I was a breaker. I was into the culture. I eventually became a graffiti writer. I'm a DJ still. I was totally into hip-hop in the 80s when it first started because, again, it was really positive. It was this thing that was like helping people come up out of the neighborhoods in our urban cities. It was awesome. And during that era, there was a legendary, and I would argue maybe the first ever rap beef. It was between this hip-hop group called UTFO and this female rapper named Roxanne Shante. And I don't know if you've ever heard the track. Roxanne, can't you understand? Roxanne, I wanna be your man. They were huge, and they went back and forth for like 8 records, and like people cared for the first like 3 or 4, and then it just became like annoying and a shtick after a while. But the first 4 like records back and forth were legendary. And if you haven't heard those songs, listen to them on YouTube or whatever. It was a thing. But that was kind of like the first ever diss track. And what happened was that people were like, "This is silly. Let's just battle in person." And that's when you really saw who the real MCs were. Biggie Smalls. How did he build his name? He built his name battling face to face in the streets with other rappers. Like, this diss track crap where you make fun of somebody on a recording and then you go back and work on another recording for 4 days and then come back. It's so pathetic. If you guys really care about it, show up face to face and rap battle. Like, that's how you solve it to me. Anything else is just being a coward and copping out. As far as those two are concerned, I have no love for Drake at all. I think his beats are simple, like they're like 3 loops that he eats for pizza over and over again. I think his music is not good. I know it's going to offend some people, don't care. Kendrick Lamar at least is a decent lyricist. I like the rhymes that he writes. At least they have some substance to them. Drake is just like, wah, wah, Lamborghini, Lamborghini. I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care about any of this, honestly. I don't know why I just talked about it all this time. I think hip-hop and rap is in the toilet. It was way better when it first started. It'll never come back, I know, because everybody's so concerned about, flim-flammy, like, possessions and all this crap that I don't care about. So it'll never go back to what I liked about it, and that's probably why I just don't really care about rap or hip-hop anymore. Okay, our last question for this episode of Ask Shane Anything comes from Mick Womble. Wizards of the Coast have said it wants to create another Baldur's Gate game without Larian Studios. After the high quality of Baldur's Gate 3, do you think this IP is now a bit of a poison chalice? Will other studios want to work on it with a near impossible comparison to live up to? Mick Womble, I think that Wizards of the Coast are in a terrible position. They are in a no-win position right now because they just had this huge hit that everybody loves. I loved it. I'm assuming you at least enjoyed it. Most people at least enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3. Actually, I would argue most people really love Baldur's Gate 3. I am one of those people. It was my game of the year. So I think it's a great game, and that's great for Wizards of the Coast. However, I don't think it ever counted on, if Larian built a big hit, that it would not come back. And that was Wizards of the Coast failing. It failed to see that Larian was going to create a great game, and therefore it might be smart to sign a contract for more than one game before the game came out. And it got all this acclaim. At the very least, once it hit early access, and it was in early access for a while, and people started basically gushing over it, which they did, at that point, like, a light bulb should have gone off. Should have been like, hey, like, we got something here. Like, maybe we should lock down Larian for another 2 games. Or they didn't do that. It didn't do that. And that was a huge mistake. And so now Larian is like, hey, everybody knows we made Baldur's Gate 3. And when we go to make our next game, we can always say, from the developers of Baldur's Gate 3, Game of the Year, blah, blah, blah. They can now parlay the success of Baldur's Gate 3 into their next project. Unfortunately, Wizards of the Coast cannot do that. And so, to go back to answer your question, are other studios going to be intimidated and scared to work on Baldur's Gate 4? Yeah, I think they will be, because you're right. It is a lot to live up to. However, if you're a real studio that believes in your skills and abilities, you want to take on challenges like this. And not just studios, game development studios. In life, this is the way you should be. Like, you should never be afraid of competition. If you want to be the best, you have to go up against the best. And you have to defeat the best. And you have to prove that you're better than the best. And so, yes, I do think some studios may balk on the idea of creating Baldur's Gate 4, but I do think that some studio will step up with what I just said. That aesthetic, like, okay, well, they did a good job. We can do a better job. And I think there are studios out there that are willing to do that. And if they do that, they can ride the coattails, ride the wake of Baldur's Gate 3 and sell more copies than they would have if they had just made Baldur's Gate 3 themselves and it was so-so. So Larian may be leaving Baldur's Gate to go create its new IP or work on some of its old IP, but I think it's left the Baldur's Gate franchise in a place where people are going to be open to it, where with Baldur's Gate 3, there wasn't a lot of groundswell around that game before it came out. People weren't really rallying around it. Like, a couple people who had been in early access were like, you might want to keep an eye on this one, but that's pretty much it. That will not be the case with Baldur's Gate 4. So, if you're a studio and you do put your best foot forward, you will be rewarded for it. People will pay attention, people will see your game, and if you deliver on it, you will reap the reward. So, it's a complicated situation, but I think ultimately, if everyone plays their cards right, Wizards of the Coast should do very well, and Larian also will do very well. Okay, that's it for Ask Shane Anything. Hope you guys have had a great week, and hope you have an awesome weekend of video game action planned. Again, we are running short on questions for this show. We will do another episode in 2 weeks, and I'm hoping there will be more questions to choose from. Again, just go to our forums. There's a link in the header at SIFTD.net that'll take you to our forums where you can leave questions for me 24/7, 7 days a week. That's redundant. But anyway, go there and leave questions to make sure I have enough for our next episode. And again, I want to thank everybody who's pledging at that Ask Shane tier at $7 or more per month. Because of you guys, this show happens. And I will say, I do enjoy doing it. And it seems like you guys enjoy watching it because this has become the second most popular show on Sifted now. Kind of crazy, I know. So anyway, thanks to everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll see you for Game Face on Tuesday.
That's what you get. It happened to me. Ain't that right, Mix Master? ICE. Roxanne, Roxanne.
thought you had a rope, you thought you was Cupid. But EMD, your rap was plain stupid. I know you're educated, but when will you learn? Not all girls want to be involved with bookworms. You gotta be strong to which you can't resist. So educated rapper, bust this. Since she's a new girl around the block, I had to let her know I was the debonair. Doctor said you call yourself a doctor. I said, this is true. She said, explain to me really what doctors must do.